Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you're joining us from. I'd like to welcome you to the Appsian webinar on SAP policy-based data masking. Um, uh, just a little bit of meeting management. We are on GoToWebinar, so everybody is muted, so you cannot ask any questions, verbally. So what you can do is utilize the GoToWebinar control panel, which is typically on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a question and answer section, so you can submit questions that way as well. We will cover off on the questions at the very end of the session. So just make sure that you get those in there, and then we'll get those answered during the session today. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and talk about what we want to discuss today. So obviously this is a policy-based data masking. So a couple of the challenges are, how you can explore security and risk compliance risks. Can they be addressed with data masking? Review the current limitations of protecting sensitive data in SAP, and learn how a policy-based solution using ABAC, which is an attribute-based access control and business rules, can be used to efficiently address these challenges, and discover how centralized administration and policy management can accelerate go live and reduce total cost of ownership, TCO. So with that, that's the general topics that we want to cover off on today. We do have a demo. We also have some use cases in there that we will be discussing. Just a quick note, I myself, the Executive Director of the Security Solutions, once again, my name is Greg Wendt. I'm also joined by Rajesh. He'll be doing some of the demo and obviously helping with a lot of the Q&A down at the end. We've both been involved with ERP applications for many, many years, and look forward to hosting you guys on the webinar today. So with that, I want to go ahead and just kind of introduce Appsian a little bit and who we are. So we were founded in 2012, and what we do is provide data security for multiple different platforms. As you can see over on the right-hand side there, not only are we SAP certified, we are also an Oracle Gold partner. So we have products that work inside of both of the spaces. What it does is we allow you to protect your applications, your ERP systems at the data level. So it's a data level, data-centric security with real-time analytics on the back end to be able to understand exactly how your systems are being utilized. So it gives you the complete picture and the protection of what needs to happen for that data. We do have over 250 customers worldwide. And as I said, we're both certified. So when we talk about why there's challenges inside of SAP, there's an abundance of sensitive data across the entire organization, especially inside of these ERP systems. I mean, if you think about ERP as a whole, it doesn't really matter which one you're running. You'll be running HCM, finance, supply chain, all of these different huge business processes and flows inside of themselves with hundreds and thousands of transactions, really. Just massive systems in size and scope. And with that, there's thousands of fields of data. And when we're talking to some organizations, just thinking about the size and scope, I mean, they may have tens of thousands of roles inside of their SAP system that are trying to define exactly how people should be able to access that sensitive data in the business transactions that they normally work with. So, it's obviously a huge challenge just because of the massive size of some of these systems and what they're there to solve. And they do a very good job of doing the business transactions that they do. But what we're talking about is being able to protect that data as those transactions are actually happening. So, and that really is the focus, is changing the shift from a user having access. Oh, I can do this based upon my roles, that I have permission to be able to access this. What we're doing is giving and flipping the data requirements to have the focus on the security there, and almost a zero trust model. So understanding, this particular transaction may have financial data. It may, maybe even has a, industry secret recipe for some particular manufacturing scenarios, or, maybe defense agencies and things like that. So it's not just PII and financial data. It's really all sorts of data that are private and secure for your particular organization. So you have a lot of pressure and requirements there, and it's shifting that. As I've said before, all of these systems were really designed to, I'm going to grant access and we're going to process data. So we're going to bring in a lot of data, we're going to process that data, we're going to report on that data, and hopefully we're going to do the business processes that we're designed to do. So through that, we've got to make sure that the auditing, compliance, all those needs are met, and that really people who shouldn't be touching or seeing the data aren't able to do it. So, a shift has also come with the way the hackers attack these systems as well. It's shifted definitely towards a user-centric. They don't necessarily attack the organization as much anymore as they do the individual person. What they'll do is spend a lot of time and effort, doing the research on your organization, who holds particular roles. Let's see, if I'm going to look at somebody who might be a payroll benefit administrator, or maybe somebody who's handling vendors, or paying large vendors and those type of scenarios. So I'm going to target them specifically, to enable specific threats. I want to go after financial data. I want to go after wire fraud, data exfiltration, and espionage. Those are the certain bullet points that I'm really looking for as a hacker to try to get out of your ERP system. First off, I want money. That's gonna that's gonna be something that keeps me doing what I'm doing, and they have a return on investment just like we do, from running these applications. We want to keep them up and running and efficient, and run our business in a certain manner. And that's the goals of these ERP systems. So what we're doing is from the idea of data, though, is shifting that. Traditional access controls stop at the transactional layer. What we're talking about here is limited amount of data protection within the transactions. Often not, data is exposed even when it's unnecessary. A lot of times now you almost have to go with the idea of, you're not going to see it unless you absolutely have to see it. And when we think about that, trying to report on it, it causes problems as well. If we think about GDPR, or a lot of the initiatives around privacy and who's accessing data, it becomes very difficult to report on this. When you think about these huge systems, how many different transactions this data set might be included in, who can view them, who can see them, where they're all exposed on. And now I have to be able to track each and every one of those touch points to really be able to understand from the reporting who's done what have they seen, what have they touched. So that implicit data protection is really not enough. We've got to change that to be explicit. We need to control how people are accessing the data, and when they can see it and when they cannot see it. When we think about some of the protections around data level, out of the box, there's no data masking capabilities, inside of the SAP system. It requires, integrations, customizations, and limited adoption. It comes down to the fact of, typically when we think about an SAP system, they're large, they're inside of your network, for example. So maybe people think that because it's on my network, I don't have to necessarily worry about the data. And those static rules that are applied are going to be enough. Those are the things that, if you think about separation of duties, for example, and how large those reports can be and how much time you spend dealing with that. Those are the type of things that we're talking about, is being able to take that, to make your business processes more efficient, to have your policy controls brought back into the application. So when you're talking about the data protection right now, is very limited in what the options are that you can do. So what about that ROI? How long will the implementations consume effective value? As you're shifting through, just like every major ERP platform right now is kind of going through upgrades and changes, as you're shifting from ECC to S4, what are you going to do in ECC that isn't going to work in S4? Is it going to have to redesign? Are you going to have to look at it? How much time and effort am I going to have to put into something like this? So if I can go to a policy control that's built within the system, that's not a customization or me having to put a lot of work into, that there's a lot of advantages for that. Even implementation of GRC module inside of ECC can be very extensive. We were talking to somebody the other day, and it was taking them an extremely long time to get it up and running. I mean, it was a multiple year project to get that up and running and try to install it the way they needed it. That's a significant challenge, and is that setup going to work when you ship to S4? How much of that is going to have to be redesigned, and you want to make sure that you're investing wisely in these applications right now. So as I said earlier, even like the hackers, we want ROI. We want the return on what we have invested in these, and sometimes that means we need to look at it from a new approach. Our approach from a data masking is dynamic, fine-grained, it's scalable. So it's a shift in how we're thinking about it. As I was discussing earlier in some of the slides, it is very dynamic. So as our platform is installed and configured inside of these systems, we consider context, we consider other pieces of information to enforce that policy based. So we allow you to build those policies to protect your systems as you see fit. So it's a policy based control, and we give you the access back to that field level protection. So you can decide how you want people to interact with those fields, what they're going to do, how the user is going to work through that transaction. Maybe they can see the data, maybe they can't see the data, maybe they can see the transaction, maybe they can't. I'll go into more detail in a minute with that. But and then obviously you have to be able to provide the actionable insights on the back end, because what that is going to enable is a life cycle. If you don't understand what's happening in the system, you can't make changes to it to improve your security footing. So the data is going to allow you to always continue to improve that life cycle, and it basically just becomes something that you're continually improving your footprint on. And nowadays, that's not something that we want to take lightly, especially with the shift of remote access and a lot of people working from home from this short period of time. The question always comes up now as to how has this changed access moving forward. As I said earlier, typically, SAP systems aren't available outside of their firewall. Are they outside of your firewall now? How are people connecting? You want to make sure that you're controlling your sensitive information, whether that's private information from a person, from your organization, defense, all of those types of things need to be able to be done regardless of how somebody is accessing your system. So when we dig in a little bit further about a policy-based data mask, typically we extend the masking capabilities into SAP with fine-grained contextual controls. The context is really the difference, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail, but it's dynamic. It's not the same. So as somebody's going to be accessing sitting at their desk versus coming in from home, you can define via that policy how you want that user to interact with that transaction. What do I want to protect? What do they need to see? How do I want them to work with that transaction? Should they be able to do that? If somebody is at the main office versus a manufacturing facility, should they be able to have the same access? Should they see one-to-one? Maybe they shouldn't. But that's when we go back to these, static systems as they're defined and built to where I have my roles, I have my permissions. I'm going to do what I can do inside of the system. And that means frequently that I can access that data wherever I can log into the system. So it's a native integration. I'll continue to go into that, but that dynamic protection, I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. What we're shifting to is from a role-based access control to policy-based combining attributes and business rules. So what that really does is it allows me to take in other information in the decision factor of whether somebody should have access to that data set. And in that scenario, I'm talking about data set. It could be transaction. It can be, basically the transaction as you see fit. So as we simplify a process, and I'll go through this, but some of those attributes that we're going to take in effect could be who the user is, where they're coming from, the time of day, the number of attempts, the country or region, the IP, those types of things. Frequently from a government perspective, it could be anything outside of 8 to 5 access or maybe 9 to 6, depending upon how you want to do that. If somebody's accessing information at 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 a.m. and in the morning, should that be allowed? Do you want that to be able to happen? And then what type of data are they looking at? Typically, some other questions we see is, where they're accessing from. Well, maybe I have a development staff that's based out of, another country. Well, they go on vacation in a third country. Should they be able to access from there? No, we want to shut it off from there. Well, if they're not relatively where they should be, we want to make sure that they're not going to be able to have that access. So those are some of the policies, and that's really what this does. Is you frequently have policies as an organization that are defined. I don't want data to leave my SAP system. I don't want it to exfiltrate. I don't want people to do these sorts of transactions inside of the system remotely or from this port. So that what we do is we take all of those things combined and allow you to have a nice policy base that you can inject all of these into the system to decide how you are going to allow them to work with that transaction and data. So a one-to-many approach, as I said, this is a centralized policy. So you can come up with a single rule set, and it quickly minimizes the threats that you're going to have inside of SAP. So it allows you to adapt without having to reconfigure. You're not making changes to, your pages and screens and stuff. Comes via our centralized policy that we're going through. So the system wide is really important, because then you don't have to worry about all of those different endpoints or all of the touch points as to where some of this data could be seen. It is something that if I want to mask, let's say a national ID, for example, I want to do that everywhere. I don't want to have to touch each and every one of those transactions to be able to do that. And that's the centralized policy of how we can apply that. Native integration, as we said, we're a certified partner with SAP, and if you want to know the information about that, we can give you, but there's certain requirements, especially across the line with performance and things like that, that you have to go through before you can become a partner with SAP. So a lot of times, somebody's going to ask, well, what happens from a performance perspective? Well, for us to be certified, we have to meet all of those requirements up front before we can even say we're a certified partner. So that native integration really and really makes a difference as to how you're going about this. So this is what enables that policy: the fact that it's one to many, the fact that we are built inside of the application. It makes it easier to support, easier to implement, faster return on investment when you're talking about getting it up and live. That last bullet point there, the policy is in line. We're inside of the application set. So you're not having to touch base to other third-party tools, cloud solutions or something like that. The other side of it is all inside. So when you're talking about the security measures that you want to put into effect, they're yours. It's not somebody else who's managing. Nobody else has access to it. Same with the data that's actually collected. Those are all stored, it's stored locally to you. So that data is private to you. So it's not something that our team has access to. So a lot of times that challenge in and of itself can make a lot of people inside of SAP or the security groups very give them a little heartburn, so to say, if we want to look at it from that perspective, because who's able to access it, who's able to see this data, this is all yours. So it's not something that we have remote access to do. So, the nice part is being native inside the SAP app server, we have our security platform that plugs in and the rules engine that's inside of that. So that's one of the things that, enables that fluid inline integration of the data, and how we're able to do that one-to-many policy settings of where when I'm looking to mask a particular data action or block an action, we can do that across the board based upon that attribute-based access controls. So let's talk briefly about a couple of different use cases. I want to drill into some examples. So let's take an HR use case, and by that we'll just take an example T code. So I'm going to look at the PA20, and Rajesh is going to go in and demo this. So I'm just kind of talking through a couple of the use cases beforehand. So this is all about protecting personal sensitive information. So at that point, maybe it's not necessarily built around protecting some sort of secret or something inside of SAP. It's really personal information. But the nice part about it is what we're doing here can be done on any particular transaction with any field. So this is just an example. So when we're talking about personal information, let's say I'm in the office and I'm working with the system. I'm going to be able to do all of my normal, functions inside of PA20 that I would normally be able to do, that I've been given access to. Let's say part of that changes how I'm accessing the system. So let's say I'm now remote, or I'm working from a coffee shop, or now working from home, dealing with this particular challenge everybody is. So I'm working from home. Should I see all of the same information? No, let's go ahead and protect it, because maybe you're accessing from a non-business owned device, even though you're connecting to the VPN. I don't want that sensitive information. If you take a screenshot or print, or try to store the data, I don't want that data to be on the screen for you to work with. There's numerous reasons when we're talking about a remote connection in, as to why I might want to protect that sensitive information. It just makes logical sense, honestly. It minimizes my threat vector in the exposure of information as to what could leak. And then maybe the last one is after hours. Our normal working time is 8 to 5. So going back to that example of coming in at 10 o'clock at night, I'm not going to be able to access that transaction at all. It's going to be denied. It's not only that I have the ability, by the permissions of the SAP system to get there, but what we have done is there's a policy that says, no, from outside or after 6 o'clock or after 7 o'clock at night, you're not going to be able to access that transaction anymore. So we're going to deny you access. We're going to log that out so that we can report on it to let people know, okay, somebody attempted to access PA20 outside of the normal business function hours that your organization sets. Taking that to a financial supply chain environment, let's talk about pricing or sales order data dynamically changing based upon location and time. So if I'm looking at VA03, same type scenario. I'm going to come in from the office. I'm going to have access to everything that I need to have access for. I can do what I need to do. Let's say that I'm in a remote office, or maybe I'm at a vendor's office. I'm somewhere else, manufacturing facility. Should I be able to log in and see, because I'm now remote, all of the same information? Maybe some of that's very private, depending upon what vendor you're looking at, or where you're at location wise. So we want to protect that data very much like we do the personal information. It's protecting what your organization deems as private, or that you want to keep private. That's why when I give examples here, it's not just private personal information or vendor information. It can be anything that your organization wants to keep private and not have anybody have access to, or be able to protect that data at another level. So in that situation, we're gonna mask out that the price there, and then after hours, once again, in a scenario like that, we're going to be able to stop them from accessing the transaction completely. I don't want somebody going in and working with the A03 after the normal business hours. That's just common sense at that particular point in time. So a couple other use cases we can go through, whether it's GDPR compliance, fraud and theft, masking of PII of customers inside of CRM based upon their residency. That's one of those things that we've had, we have been working with numerous customers, because with over 250 customers, we've got customers, all over the planet dealing with different privacy laws. And it's a different challenge as to, what we're going, what they need to do, what they need to report on. Fraud and theft, when you get into a scenario like that, coming in and changing out bank account fields. These are examples that have come to us. So when you think, oh, that our organization doesn't do this, these are things that we've actually heard, happening in live production systems. So these are the challenges organizations are seeing today. So we want to mask data fields in transactions that are unnecessary for the role. Typically a lot of times that's why you have the role explosion inside of these systems, is because, well, this role will allow this one allows this one allows this. You know, so what you want to do there is, one, it helps you control your security. The policy can be defined that, you know, almost the exception, you know, mask this data for everybody unless they have XYZ, you know, unless they're in this particular situation. So it allows you to protect that data by default rather than by exception. And that's really one of the ways that you want to think about this, is if I'm protecting my sensitive data, I want to do it by default. I don't want it exposed unless it's explicitly known. I don't want to implicitly make any guarantees as to how this data is being protected. You know, masking of unpublished financial information in high-risk scenarios. So when you talk about risk mitigation, after hours remote work, you know, what are admins doing? What are they changing? You know, what are developers doing? All of those type of things. So, you know, it helps deal with those additional use cases. So it's something that we've looked into this at multiple different levels. And as I said, these are common scenarios that have come back to us as to why organizations are looking to do this. So this is something we've seen in the wild occurring quite frequently. So with that, I'm going to stop presenting on my side. I'm going to hand it over to Rajesh. He can do a quick introduction of himself. He's going to go through demo, and then he'll hand it back to me. I'll demo some of the analytics, and then we'll go on with the PowerPoint. So Rajesh, I'm going to hand it over to you real quick.
Thanks, Greg. I'm going to share my screen here. Please let me know when you can see it.
Got it.
All right. So my name is Rajesh Rangaratnam. I am the VP of Product Engineering for SAP products at Appsian. I've been working on SAP products and applications for the last 20 plus years, both on the product side as well as on the application side. So here I wanted to show a couple of scenarios that Greg went through. The first thing that I wanted to show is that these two users that I'm logged in as are set up in the same way. So we can show how access is being controlled through policies and not through the roles. So I have dev user here, and I'm going into the profile of this user, and you can see this user has SAP all. So from an SAP point of view, this user can pretty much do anything within the system. The second user, this is my user ID, that's the allowed user. And this user also has SAP all. So from a role point of view, they have the same kind of setup within the system. So now all the authorizations and access control that we layer on top is going to be through the Appsian security platform. The first use case that I wanted to walk through is the HR master data that Greg was talking about. So this user that I'm logged in as is set up as a user coming in from a safe range of IP within the IP CIDR range. So this user will be able to view everything within the transaction. So when I go into the personal data, you can see that this user actually has access to all information such as personal information, last name, first name, social security number, date of birth. So now when I switch over to this second user, this user is set up as someone who's coming in from a range or an IP address that's outside of the secure IP range that's defined. So when this user goes into PA20, and let me use the same employee so it's easier to compare, and tries to view the personal data, you can see that there is certain information within the transaction which is configured. We can also extend the fields that are configured as PII. In this case, there are a bunch of fields that we have selected, and we have marked them as PII sensitive. And so this user is not able to view personal information, social security number, date of birth, things like that. Now, for some reason, we want to allow this user to view first name and let them view that info. The way we do that is we just go into the config and we can change the list of information that we want to allow this user to view. For example, in this case, within PA20, we have a bunch of fields that we have marked as sensitive. So I'm going to just go and mark or remove this field from being PII. Now, when I save it and go back, and now run the same transaction from this user ID and try to view the personal data, you can see that the first name now is visible to the user. So the list of fields that we can mark as sensitive within a transaction is all configurable. So we can add in as many fields as needed, or remove fields, or add in custom fields as well. And information within that sensitive list would be blocked for certain users under certain conditions. So that's an example of how we can control sensitive data access under certain context. So that's an example from a master data transaction. The same thing can be done also in a transaction data scenario. For example, here I'm going into the sales order display, and I'm trying to view information within the order. And in this case, what we have done is we have marked certain fields as being sensitive. And in this case, it's the net price and the net value. So this user, when the user tries to view the sales document, this user is allowed to view the net price and the net value. Whereas when I switch over to the second user and go into the same document and try to view the sales order, and I scroll to view the net price and the net value, you can see that this user does not have access to that information. So we can control information at the master data level, or at the transactional data level, or at within the transaction data, it could be the header level, item level, and schedule line level. And even within this transaction, if you see, net value is available at the item level as well as at the header level, and we chose to hide it at this level. And if needed, we can also add this field as sensitive, and we can mask or not provide the information at the header level as well. So those are two examples of how we can do masking based on a location, and also we can control the kind of data that is being displayed to the user. The third use case that I wanted to run through is the business partner transaction. And in this case, when the user goes into the transaction and runs it, selects a business partner, you can see this user, again, is able to view all the information within the transaction. And there are certain fields here that we have just marked as sensitive information, but this user can view all the information. For example, the city, the postal code, the telephone number, email ID, things like that. So now when I go back to this second user and try to go into the same transaction for the same business partner, and try to view that information, you can see that certain information is masked. So postal code and communication details such as telephone number and email have been masked. And the masking template is also flexible, configurable, so you can change the masking template if you don't even want to allow the user to view the number of characters in the domain or in the email ID. So this use case is a little bit different than the first two. In this case, the way we have set up this use case is that with this information is available to the user under certain conditions. And the condition that we have chosen for this particular scenario is at the date range. So if I want to allow this user to view the information, all I need to do is go change this information. So here, what we have said is the deny date is from the 1st of Feb to the 8th of April. Now I'm going to change this to the 1st of April so that now the date falls outside of the current range, and now the user should be allowed. So the denied date range ends in April and on the 1st of April. So now when the user goes into the transaction, the user should be able to view that information. So now I'm going to go back and run this transaction again. And now you can see that the information is now available to the user. You can see the postal code is displayed, and also the telephone number and email ID are displayed to the user. So this restriction is based on the context variable that is the date range that we have defined here. So irrespective of what condition it is, it's all configurable, and we can use user attribute or the data attribute or the context attribute in order to control how the users view that information. And the good thing about this is it's also UI agnostic, because we're doing it at the back end. We can control it even when the user is coming in through, say, a different UI, such as a Fiori app. So in this case, if I were to run the same transaction here and try to view the information here, in this case, I'm going into the business partner transaction again. You can see that this user is able to view all the information within the transaction. That's because I changed the date range. Now I'm going back and I'm going to update the context attribute so that the current date falls under the deny range. So now I save this info, and I'm going to go back to the app to run this transaction again. So I go back into the app and run the business partner transaction. Now you can see that the information is no longer available for the user, and it's been masked. So the user is not able to view the details that was previously available. So that's how we can dynamically control the information in the transaction. We can also run a second transaction. In this case,
Hey, Raj, while you're doing that, may I break in and ask you a question here that just came up in the chat?
Sure, yeah.
Essentially, the question is, can you log and mask based on the field level, independent from the transaction level?
So yeah, sure. So I think the question is, if the fields are available in multiple transactions, would we be able to mask them across those different transactions? And the answer is yes. So as part of the product, what we provide is an implementation tool that identifies the transactions that display the fields. And so we configure those transactions within the Appsian platform, and those fields would be blocked across the different transactions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Not a problem. So what I was trying to show here was one other transaction, which is the PA20 transaction that we ran on the GUI. Now we are going to run this here on the app. And then I just want to pick the same employee so that we can view the difference. So here you can see that the same data is now available on the Fiori app as well. And the user has access only to the information that's configured as or not sensitive. So all sensitive information is blocked, and the user does not have access to it. So just because of the way we intercept the transaction and we apply all the policy evaluation and the enforcement at the application layer, we are able to use this same interception across multiple UIs and provide the same kind of access control across these different applications. And as Greg was mentioning, this is all happening during the transaction processing and when the data is available to the user on the GUI. And so the data at the back end on the database side is still unencrypted and is available for other transactions and computations. So those were the different scenarios that I wanted to share from a masking point of view. And I also wanted to go over the analytics part that we provide as part of the product. So we provide detailed analytics on different kinds of actions that the user does within the system. So let me bring in the analytics here. So the dashboard is tailored to different user types, such as business owners and compliance officers and usage from an admin point of view. And so I'm just going to go into one of these to show how the analytics looks like. So in this case, you can see we collect information at a far more granular and finer detail than what standard SAP reports provide. So we can see the count of transactions, the most often executed transactions, and the IPs from which these transactions are being executed, details of how many transactions are being allowed or denied, and similarly a geographic map from which the access is happening, and also how many are being allowed or denied from a transaction point of view or even from a user point of view. And here is the encryption detail. In this case, we capture how many users have full access to the transaction and are able to view all the information within the transaction. And when they are viewing only the information that is configured as not so secure, that is captured here in the limited access report. So you can see that these users have logged into the transactions, but they did not have full access to the information within the transaction. So those kind of detail can be captured and reported on the analytics side. And similarly, we can capture trends by user groups and also based on the IP address ranges where they come in from, and count of privileged access and non-privileged user access. And similarly, transactions within the system can be configured as critical, as well as we can look at information such as critical transactions that are being accessed by privileged users, that is elevated access users, so that we can check how those users are using those roles within the system. And we can, in some cases, go down to the field level and see what information is being changed by these users. For example, here you can see SAP Basis user has used PFCG, and this is the document on which the user has worked on, and also the table that's affected the role table, and similarly the field and also the value that was assigned to that field. So it goes down to the level that we need to track. And also these are out of the box reports, and if we need to capture other information, we can do that by config. And one other report that I wanted to share is the business risk analytics report. This one is tailored more towards the business users, and the platform, in addition to just providing encryption, provides business process control and SOD controls. So this one is one of the reports that we capture based on the business process risks that are configured within the system and within the platform. And an example of that would be any new master data being created in the system, or master data being changed multiple times within the system, so which is a red flag. So we would want to know why master data is being changed so often and by who within the system, and we wanted to capture and trigger alerts for those. And similarly, if somebody's changing prices or overriding discounts, we can go into the transactions and capture who is doing it, what is the transaction that's being used, what is the document, what is the field, and how many times they are changing it, things like that. And similarly, it can be in any of the different sections or modules within the supply chain. So here, finance, and we can capture how many times information is being changed. For example, this is report based on how many times the payment terms are being changed within the system. So that's something that I wanted to share from an analytics point of view. And there's one more report. I'll just run through it pretty fast. So this is the compliance risk. And as I was talking about SOD, I just wanted to go down and share the SOD reports as well. So in this case, the good thing about the platform is that it doesn't trigger any false positives. For example, GRC, because it's at the transaction level, it would block someone if they are trying to create a purchase order and are trying to post goods receipt, irrespective of who created the purchase order or if it's the same purchase order for which the user is trying to post the goods receipt. But in the case of the Appsian platform, what it does is it goes down to the document level. And so if a user is creating a PO, we capture that PO and also the document that the user is creating. And if the user is trying to post goods receipt against that document, then we would know exactly that it's a violation and the user gets flagged. So now we know this is the goods receipt document that the user is trying to post against this particular purchase order. And so there's a direct link, which is a violation of the segregation of duties rules. So the report captures this information and it's reported. So there's all the information that the report captures here are positives, and so actionable insights are provided through this report, so we can go in and see why it was done. So that's pretty much what I had from a demo point of view. Back to you, Greg.
Perfect. Thanks, Rajesh. I'm going to go ahead and grab the screen back. Ooh, grab the wrong one. So as Rajesh was talking, you kind of get an idea as to how our platform works within the SAP system. So, we give you all of those controls back through the data-centric security in that policy engine. You can make those changes. You can decide how you want people to interact with all of that data. And we've got the logging and the analytics on the back end. So we're blending all of those different things together, the attribute-based controls, the data security, the policy engine, everything together to be able to give you that finite control back over your SAP system. So it is native inside, just a quick graph of what it looks like. As Rajesh was going through, you could see the way that he interacted with the setup and the configuration of it. So it was all inside of SAP. It's inside the app server. So it's applying to all of those different transactions. So you can see how that would affect the implementation. You're not talking about something that is going to take years to implement. This is going to be a 60-day project that you're going to be able to install inside of your system. Obviously, there's a negligible performance impact because that's part of what you have to pass with SAP. So that's already been done and checked, and streamlined maintenance and updates coming to you. So from a wrap-up perspective, it's really a shift to the data. That's really what we're giving you back with this security, is understanding who's touching your data, what they're doing with it, what kind of changes they're making with it. But we're giving you the ability to control how you want people to interact with your data. And that's the main key, is it allows you to focus on that. It's important to you for your organization. Your secure data or private data is different than in other organizations. You may want to protect something completely different than what they do. So you need to balance the security with the usability, but it's easy to see, as you could watch Rajesh make the changes, those dynamic controls really make this something that you can utilize inside of your system, and it really reduces the threat. That's the grand scheme of things, is your threat surface is going to be minimized because you're reducing where the data is going to be accessible from, and that's going to help protect the data. It's going to keep the things you want private, and it's going to keep you out of the headlines, which is the ultimate goal for a lot of people. And going with a native solution allows you to really reduce your total cost of ownership, and it's a better solution from the performance and the usability of the application there. So With that, I'll open it up for questions. You'll notice there is an email address at the bottom of the screen there. If you have additional questions or want to follow up, you can email us at info@appsian.com, and you can also visit us on the web at appsian.com as well. So with that, Joseph, I think you are going to manage the questions.
Okay, Greg, I've got 3 here for you. First and foremost, how is this different from SAP UI masking?
So this is Rajesh. So the way UI masking works is on the ECC side, you would have to create roles for the user groups that you need for the allow and the deny. So the user gets the allowed role, and the user is able to view the information within the transaction. If the user gets the denied role, then the user is denied from viewing the sensitive information within the transaction. And as a result of the roles being assigned to the users, it's pretty static. So it doesn't take into consideration attributes such as, is the user coming in from within the network, or is the user accessing it from a different location that's not so secure, which is different from his normal work location, or is the user trying to access the information outside of normal work hours? So those kind of information don't get used in the policy decision-making process or in the access decision-making process. And so irrespective of where the user is, depending on the role, the user gets to see the information or is blocked from viewing that information. So that's where we are different, because we use the ABAC approach, attribute-based access control, and we take into account not only the user role, because we layer on top of the roles. So if the user is already assigned a role, we let that kick in, and then we apply these additional attributes. It could be either the user's attributes or classification information about the data, which is the other thing that UI masking doesn't use, and context attributes. So those are like 3 different dimensions that are being taken into account when we make the access control decision, whereas UI masking relies on the role that is attached to the user.
Great. Okay, thanks, Raj. The next question we had was, can this be used in non-production environments?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the use cases that we commonly see from customers is that when data gets refreshed from production into QA, people want to make sure that that information is not being accessed or being misused by the people working or accessing QA environment. So we can provide the similar kind of masking and access control on the QA environment as well.
Okay, great. And then our last question for you, what does the go live timeline look like?
So the typical implementation for the project is, as Greg mentioned, it's 8 weeks, or depending on the number of fields that you want to protect, or the different kinds of features that you want to implement, not only encryption, but you also, which by encryption, I mean you have the masking, or if you also want to add in business process controls or an SOD, it might go to 10 to 12 weeks, but typically it's around 8 to 10 weeks.
Great, and I think that's all. Let's wrap this up. Go ahead, Greg.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Appreciate the help there, Joseph. And I'd just like to thank you for attending the webinar today. Rajesh and I appreciate your time. If you do have additional questions, like I said, you can email us below, or you can visit us on the web. And we do look forward to seeing you on another webinar here in the near future. So thank you for attending, and have a great rest of your day.